There's something about the wind in fall that feels different from any other time of year. It doesn't just move through the trees, it whispers through them. It carries something unseen, something old. You can hear it late at night, when the streets are empty and the moon is hanging low. Silver light spilling across the ground like a warning. It's almost as if the air itself remembers what it once carried, and if you stand still long enough, it might remember you too. Some say that when the season shifts, so does the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond it. Maybe that's why the wind changes its voice. Maybe that's why people start seeing things that shouldn't exist once the leaves begin to die. It begins subtly, barely noticeable at first. A shadow beneath a street lamp that lingers too long, a faint echo when you're sure you're alone. The sound of dry leaves crunching behind you when you stop walking. It's easy to dismiss it as your imagination. After all, fall nights have a way of making everything seem a little unreal. The chill creeps into your bones, the fog wraps around you like a living thing, and the silence between gusts of wind feels heavier than it should. You tell yourself it's just the season playing tricks, but there's a point where the air becomes too still, the quiet too sharp, and something deep inside you knows it's not a trick anymore. There's a story about a boy named Aaron who used to walk home through a field after school every evening in October. The field was wide and open, the kind of place where the grass swayed like an ocean when the wind moved through. One evening, as the sun sank low, he noticed the wind had stopped. The air felt thick, too quiet, too perfect. Then came a whisper, soft at first, drawn out by the breeze, so faint he thought it was the echo of his own breath. But it said his name. He froze. The wind moved again, brushing past him with that same whisper, clearer this time, closer. It called his name once more, and this time it didn't come from behind, it came from in front of him. Aaron ran. He ran until his lungs burned, until his backpack felt like it was filled with stone. But no matter how fast he went, he could still hear it. His name, carried by the air, moving with him, keeping pace. When he reached home, he slammed the door shut and pressed his ear to it. On the other side, he swore he could still hear the wind whispering. His parents found him trembling by the window, staring out at the trees. He didn't go through that field again, but sometimes, even inside, he said the wind still spoke to him when it passed by his window. And what frightened him most was that it had stopped calling his name. It had started using his mother's instead. No one ever figured out what happened that night. Some people said it was a ghost. Others thought it was just fear feeding itself, creating sounds where there were none. But every fall, without fail, people in that town still say the wind changes in the same way it did that year. It starts soft and low, carrying something almost human in its tone. And if you stand too close to the edge of the field when it happens, you'll hear it too. It won't call Aaron anymore. It will call you. There's something about the season of decay that brings voices back. Maybe it's the thinning of the veil. Maybe it's the quiet between dying things that lets something else speak. People used to believe that the wind was alive, that it carried the breath of the dead, the sighs of those who couldn't rest. They said that when you feel that sudden chill, when the hair on your neck stands up, it isn't because the temperature dropped. It's because something brushed past you. Something that wasn't supposed to. One old woman, who lived near the woods her whole life, swore she could hear her husband's voice in the wind every fall after he passed. At first, it was comforting. Soft words she recognized, laughter that made her smile through her tears. But as the weeks went on, the voice changed. It began to whisper things she didn't understand, words that sounded like his but felt wrong, heavy, distorted. Then one night, she heard the door creak open, though she'd locked it. The next morning, her neighbors found her front door still ajar. The autumn leaves swept into her home, covering the floor like a blanket. She was gone. Only the echo of the wind moved through the house, whispering her name over and over. That's the thing about fall. It makes you forget how fragile the line is between this world and whatever lies just beyond hearing. You start to notice small things. Your breath mixing with the cold air, the rustle of leaves that sound too much like footsteps, the way voices sometimes travel farther in the night than they should. It's as though the season itself is alive, leaning closer, testing how much you'll ignore before you finally admit that something's wrong. If you've ever walked outside just before a storm in late October, you know the feeling, the way the air holds its breath, the way the trees bend but don't break. That deep, humming stillness, right before the wind screams through again. It's like the world itself is waiting for something to return. Some say the whispers belong to those who never made it home before the first frost. Others believe the wind carries the remnants of old promises, regrets, the kind of unfinished business that never truly leaves. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the wind in fall is just the sound of the world remembering its dead. And if you listen closely, if you stand beneath the trees as the leaves fall around you, you might hear it too. A name, a breath, a voice carried through the cold that sounds too familiar to be a stranger's. And when it calls, you'll want to turn around. You'll feel like you have to. But you shouldn't. Because those who answer the wind in autumn never stay the same again. And that's when you'll understand. When the wind changes, so do they. There's a small town tucked between the hills where the nights arrive earlier than anywhere else. The air there grows colder faster, sharper, almost as if the place itself doesn't want to let go of winter. In that town stood a house that everyone avoided. It wasn't abandoned, but it might as well have been. The walls were pale and cracked, the windows fogged even in summer, and the chimney hadn't breathed smoke in years. But when fall came, that's when it truly changed. That's when the house began to breathe again, only what came from within wasn't warmth. It was cold, a living, crawling cold that seeped out from the cracks, spilling across the ground like mist. The family who lived there, the Crawfords, moved in one September, right as the leaves began to turn. They weren't locals, just city people looking for quiet, the kind who thought old houses carried charm instead of history. On their first night, they lit a fire in the living room, unpacked their boxes, and listened to the woods outside hum with the sound of crickets. Everything seemed peaceful. But as midnight came, the fire began to fade, not the way flames die naturally, but suddenly, like the air itself refused to feed it. The temperature in the room dropped so fast that the windows frosted over. Their youngest, a little girl named Lily, said she saw her breath turn white before her eyes, even though the fire still glowed faintly. Her mother laughed, thinking it was cute. Her father joked about insulation, but the next night when it happened again, there was no laughter. The cold wasn't random, it moved. One moment it would settle in the hallway, the next it would slip beneath a door, as if searching. It wasn't the kind of chill that came from drafts or cracks. It had weight to it, presence. The Crawfords tried everything. They sealed the windows, checked the vents, even brought in a repairman, but he left before finishing the inspection. He said the air in the basement felt wrong, too still. When asked what he meant, he only said, "It's not the kind of stillness that comes from emptiness. It's the kind that comes from something waiting." He didn't come back. After that, the family started noticing more than just cold. At night, they'd hear a faint hiss coming from the walls, almost like the sound of someone exhaling. The mother would wake up to find her breath fogging in front of her, even under layers of blankets. The father started sleeping on the couch closer to the fireplace, though he never said why. And Lily, she stopped speaking altogether. She'd sit by the frosted window for hours, tracing little circles into the fogged glass. When her mother asked what she was doing, she said, "It's showing me where it hides." By the end of October, the air inside the house was colder than outside. Guests could feel it as soon as they stepped through the door, that instant drop that made their skin prickle and their lungs tighten. But there was something else about that air. It didn't just chill you, it made you remember. Every breath you took inside that house brought with it a strange heaviness, like grief or guilt or fear you couldn't place. The Crawfords started fighting over small things, forgetting to eat, forgetting entire conversations. The house wasn't just cold, it was feeding. One night, after the first frost, the father woke to the sound of something moving through the vents, a slow dragging sound, like cloth sliding across wood. He followed it through the hallway, his flashlight beam trembling against the walls. When he reached the basement door, he saw a thin stream of vapor curling out from underneath it, pooling at his feet. He opened it slowly, the hinges creaking, and stepped into the darkness below. The air grew so cold it stung his eyes. And then, silence. The next morning, the basement door was wide open. The light was still on, swinging slowly from the ceiling. But he was gone. No footprints, no sound, just that same exhale, faint but steady, coming from the walls. They found his body 3 days later in the woods behind the house. He wasn't frozen solid, but close. The doctor said it was impossible. There hadn't been enough frost that week to cause that kind of damage. His eyes were open, his mouth slightly parted as if he'd been trying to breathe in something that wasn't air. The family moved out soon after. They left everything behind. The furniture, the clothes, even the family photos. But the cold stayed. Neighbors say that even now, if you walk past the house on a fall night, you can see frost creeping up the windows from the inside, forming thin white veins across the glass. Sometimes the chimney releases a faint puff of mist, though no one's lit a fire there in years. And if you stand close enough, you can hear it, the soft, steady rhythm of the house breathing. It exhales into the night like something that's still alive, like it's waiting for someone to come home. No one ever dared to move back in. The property's been sold 3 times, but every new owner leaves before the first snowfall. Some say the house doesn't want anyone inside it. Others say it's lonely, that it remembers warmth, and it wants it back. But those who've stepped through the door swear they feel something pull at their lungs, a pressure deep in the chest that makes them shiver even before they see the frost. It's not just cold air, they say. It's the breath of whatever still lives within those walls. And every fall, as the nights stretch longer, the frost begins to return. It creeps out from the foundation, across the dead grass, and toward the edge of the road, like the house is trying to breathe beyond itself, reaching for something living. The locals have learned not to look at it for too long, because sometimes, in the right light, you can see the frost shifting. You can see patterns forming in the glass, the faint outline of a face pressed against the window, fogging it with every slow, deliberate breath. And when the last leaf falls, when the air goes still, and you can hear your own heartbeat in the quiet, that's when the house exhales once more, and the cold moves on to find its next home. It started like any other fall evening, the kind where the air tastes like smoke and the trees look like they're on fire. A group of friends gathered in the woods behind their town, carrying bags of marshmallows, a speaker, and a few stories to tell. They'd been meeting like that for years, ever since high school. It was their tradition. One last bonfire before winter crept in, one last night of laughter before life pulled them all in different directions. They built the fire just as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The flames climbed high, flickering orange against the dark, the light stretching and snapping across their faces. They sat in a circle, the warmth wrapping around them as the shadows swayed at the edge of the clearing. Everything felt alive. Safe. The woods, the fire, the company. It was all so familiar, until the wind shifted It wasn't much at first. Just a small change in the air, a faint gust that made the fire hiss. The sound of the woods dulled, like something had swallowed it whole. No crickets, no rustle of leaves. Just silence, and the low crackle of burning wood. One of them, Mason, joked that it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Everyone laughed, though a few of them looked over their shoulders just to be sure. Then another sound came, soft, distant, a voice. It sounded like it came from beyond the fire, somewhere deep in the trees. A woman's voice, faint, almost playful. "Hello?" it said. They froze, glancing at one another. The woods were empty, they'd checked. Mason called back, half laughing, asking if someone was out there. No answer, just the faint whisper of the wind. Then a moment later, the voice spoke again, this time clearer, closer. It wasn't asking for help. It wasn't lost. It was repeating Mason's words, the same tone, the same rhythm, the same laugh. They thought it was an echo. But echoes don't come from behind you. One of the girls, Abby, turned and pointed toward the trees. She said she saw someone standing just outside the firelight, a shape, thin, still, almost blending with the trunks. Mason shone his flashlight that way, but the beam cut through nothing but fog. When he turned it off, though, the shape was closer. He swore he saw it move, not walking but swaying, as if it was breathing in time with the fire. The voice spoke again, but now it wasn't a woman's voice. It was Mason's. It repeated something he hadn't even said yet, something he was thinking. His heart dropped and the others went quiet. Then one by one, the voice started repeating them all, not just their words but the exact way they said them. The same nervous laughter, the same pauses. It was like the forest was learning them. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The smell of smoke grew heavier, thicker. Then the flames shifted color, darkening to a dull red, as if something was pulling the light out of it. The air felt heavier, pressing down on their lungs. One of them whispered that they should go, but no one moved. They were all staring into the fire, too afraid to look away. Because in the corner of their eyes, past the edge of the light, they could see it, a figure, standing there, watching. It was tall, its outline wrong. Too thin, too long, its face half hidden by the flicker of the flames. But what made them stop breathing wasn't the shape. It was the sound that came from it. A low, trembling voice that spoke like it had been waiting. "I know you," it said. Not as a threat, not as a whisper, but as a promise. The firelight began to dim, and panic set in. Mason threw another log into the pit, but the flames didn't rise. They sputtered, strangled, almost as if something was taking their heat. The cold crept in, wrapping around their feet, crawling up their spines. Then, one by one, the phones they had in their pockets went black. No signal, no light, just that voice, circling them now, closer. It started to say their names, each one drawn out like a breath. And then in between came laughter. Not human laughter, something off, too smooth, too empty. It echoed in a way sound shouldn't, bouncing through the clearing like it had nowhere to end. The friends huddled together, whispering prayers, but the voice only grew stronger. It was right beside them now, yet when they looked, there was no one there. Then, suddenly, the fire flared up, high, violent, bright enough to blind them. And in that flash of light, they saw what had been standing in the dark. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even solid. It looked like smoke had taken shape. Human-like but hollow. Its face stretched into something that almost resembled a smile. It reached out, not with hands, but with shadows, and the flames bent toward it, as if the fire itself was obeying. They ran, through the trees, through the cold, through the fog that felt too thick to breathe. Mason was the last to leave, glancing back once as he stumbled through the brush. He saw the fire die in an instant, snuffed out without a sound, and in that final second, before the clearing vanished behind him, he saw it again, standing where the fire had been, its head tilted, watching him go. When the police found the clearing the next morning, there was no sign of a fire. No ashes, no wood, nothing burned, just a circle of ground frozen solid, as if something had drained the warmth from it completely. The friends refused to talk about it after that night. They drifted apart, some moved away, others disappeared without warning. But one thing remained constant. Every fall, without fail, one of them would hear it again, a voice on the wind whispering their name. Sometimes it came through the trees, other times through a window left slightly open. Always at night, always just after the first bonfire of the season. The town eventually banned fires in that part of the woods. They said it was because of dry leaves, the risk of flames spreading, but the locals knew better. They say the fire didn't die that night. It moved. It became something else. A hunger that waits for the sound of laughter, for the warmth of human voices, something that listens from the other side of the flames. So when the air turns cold and the sky deepens to that strange autumn blue, be careful where you light your fire. Keep the circle small and never sit too close to the edge of the dark. Because if you listen long enough, you might hear it too. A voice, soft and familiar, calling from beyond the light. And when it laughs with you, don't laugh back. There's a path behind an old orchard on the edge of town that most people don't talk about anymore. The trees there grow too close together, their branches twisted like veins, their roots pushing up through the dirt as if trying to crawl free. The locals call it the Silent Mile, though no one really remembers who gave it that name first. It's just what it became known as. A strip of earth that doesn't make a sound. Birds don't fly over it. The wind doesn't move through it. Even the leaves that fall there lie still, untouched, and if you stand at the entrance long enough, the silence itself begins to hum, like something deep in the soil is breathing just beneath your feet. It's said that the path was once part of an old trail farmers used to take generations ago, leading from the fields to the river, but one autumn, a family walking home through the orchard never made it out. They found their cart days later, the horse still tethered, shivering, its eyes wide and wild, foam dried on its mouth. The ground around it was disturbed, circles in the dirt, as though someone had been pacing over and over. But there were no footprints leading away, only deeper in, toward the Silent Mile. After that, people began to avoid it. Not out of fear at first, but out of instinct. There's something about silence that unsettles you, that makes your heartbeat sound too loud, your breathing feel too close. And on that path, it's worse. The moment you step onto it, everything fades. The rustle of the orchard, the sound of your shoes against the earth, even the faint hum of distant traffic if you're close enough to town. It's like stepping into a vacuum, as if the world holds its breath the second you enter. There are stories about those who've walked the Silent Mile. Some say it plays tricks on your sense of time. What feels like 10 minutes turns into hours. The path isn't long, it's barely a mile, maybe less. But everyone who's made it to the other side says it felt endless, like walking through something that didn't want you to leave. And worse still, they all say they were followed. Not by a person, not by footsteps they could see, but by something that moved in perfect rhythm with them. Every step they took, there was another behind it, faint but deliberate. When they stopped, it stopped. When they turned around, there was nothing there. Some said they could even feel the air shift against their back, like someone was standing just behind them, close enough that if they turned a little too fast, they might brush against something cold. One boy, years ago, tried to prove it was all just a story. He went into the orchard one October night with a flashlight and his phone set to record. He was gone for nearly 3 hours, though the path should have taken 5 minutes. When he finally stumbled out on the other side, his face was pale, his hair damp with sweat, and he wouldn't speak for days. When his friends checked his phone, they found the video file, 2 hours and 57 minutes long. But the footage wasn't what they expected. The video started normal. The boy laughing, teasing the camera, saying how none of this was real. Then he entered the path. The moment he did, the sound cut out completely. No footsteps, no wind, no breathing. Just silence. The flashlight beam flickered a few times, lighting the trees, the ground, his face, nervous now, no longer mocking. He kept looking behind him like he'd heard something. Around the 40-minute mark, the camera started to shake. He was moving faster, his breath quick and uneven, though no sound came through. Then, near the end of the recording, something changed. The flashlight hit something ahead of him. It wasn't a person, it wasn't even moving. It looked like a shadow darker than the dark around it, standing in the center of the path. The camera trembled, zoomed in, and then, just before it cut out, the silence broke. Not with a scream, not with a word, but with a faint whisper right next to the mic, so close it almost sounded like it came from behind the phone. The whisper said his name. No one knows what he saw in that moment. He never said, but he refused to go near the orchard again. Even years later, when the town tried to clear part of the woods to make way for a road, he warned them not to touch it. He said the silence wasn't empty, it was alive. People who've walked that path say it feels like it remembers every step taken on it, like it collects the sounds that should have been there, holding them somewhere deep below the surface. Some have claimed to hear faint echoes buried in that silence, the sound of crying, of laughter, of whispered words too quiet to make out. And sometimes, if you stay still long enough, you can hear the footsteps that used to follow others long ago. Not yours, theirs. There's an old belief that silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's what's left when sound is taken away, as if something had to swallow it, absorb it, to make it disappear. Maybe that's what the silent mile is, a graveyard for noise, a place where every voice, every breath, every heartbeat that ever entered was consumed by something that wanted to keep it. The strangest part is what happens when you finally leave it. Those who've made it out say they always find something on them. A single leaf, still green, pressed against their shoulder or tangled in their hair. Always green, even if every other leaf in the orchard has turned brown. Some think it's just coincidence. Others believe it's a mark, a sign that the path knows who's walked it, that it keeps a piece of you to remember. One woman, years later, said she found that same green leaf on her doorstep every fall, even after she moved across the country. The first time she thought it was a prank. The second she started to worry. By the third she stopped opening her door after dark. No one has ever truly explained what lives in that silence or why it waits there season after season. Maybe it's a remnant of whatever took that first family, the echo of their voices turned into quiet. Or maybe it's something older, something that feeds on the sound of life, on the proof that we exist, because when there's no sound, there's nothing to remind you that you're real. And that's the danger of the silent mile. It doesn't just silence the world, it silences you. Bit by bit, step by step, until you begin to wonder if you were ever really there at all. And when you finally step off the path, and the noise of the world rushes back in, you'll swear you hear one last thing behind you. The faintest sound of footsteps, stopping exactly when you do. In an old farmhouse sitting alone at the edge of a field, there hung a single photograph that no one could quite ignore. It was large and framed in dark wood, the kind that creaked when the air grew cold. It showed a family from decades ago, 5 of them, standing in front of a harvest field under a pale sky. Their smiles were soft, their clothes simple, the kind of photograph that carries the warmth of another time. It had always been there, nailed into the wall of the hallway, untouched even as generations came and went. But one fall evening, something about that photograph changed. It started small. The youngest son of the new family living there noticed it first. He said the picture looked different, that there was someone standing behind the family in the photo. His mother brushed it off, thinking it was a shadow or just a flaw in the old glass. But when she looked closer, she saw it too, a faint outline in the field, a blur that didn't belong. It was shaped like a person, standing just behind the family, far enough away to be almost invisible, but still there. She convinced herself it must have always been that way, that she just hadn't noticed before, but deep down she knew she had. The next night, the figure was closer. The faint blur had sharpened, its outline clearer, its face still obscured, but its head tilted slightly toward the camera. The mother told her husband, but he laughed it off, saying it was moisture trapped between the glass and the photo. They tried to ignore it, but each night the figure moved, closer, more defined. By the fourth night, it stood right behind the family, its face still hidden, but its hands now visible, long, thin, reaching just above the shoulders of the figures in front of it. Something about the house began to shift after that. The air grew colder, though the fireplace burned constantly. They started waking up at odd hours, always the same time, 3:12 a.m., to the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway, but the floorboards never creaked the way they should have. The sound was soft, deliberate, like someone careful not to be caught. The mother covered the photograph with a cloth, thinking maybe she was letting her fear get the better of her. But in the morning the cloth was gone, folded neatly on the table beneath the frame. By the end of the week, the photograph no longer showed a single figure in the background. There were 3. All of them stood among the field, their faces blurred, their clothes darker than the rest of the image. And though it was impossible, the color of the sky had dimmed slightly in the photo. It wasn't the soft gray it used to be. It looked heavy now, like a storm was rolling in. The mother wanted to take it down, to burn it even, but her husband stopped her. He said it was just a trick of time, old chemicals reacting to air and light. But when he touched the frame, he pulled his hand back in shock. The wood was cold, colder than metal, colder than anything that had a right to be. That night, the power went out. The whole house was swallowed by darkness except for one thing, the photograph. It was faintly glowing, not bright, not obvious, but enough that you could see it from the stairs. A dim, pale light, as if the photo itself had caught the moon and refused to let it go. The mother whispered her husband's name, but he didn't answer. The light flickered, and in the second it dimmed, she thought she saw something move within the glass, a slow turn, like one of the figures shifting its head toward her. When the lights came back, the glow vanished. But now the photograph showed more than just the family and the field. It showed the outline of the house itself, standing behind them, faint and distant. The next morning, they packed their bags. They told themselves it was just a coincidence, just old film, just the stress of sleepless nights. But before they left, the mother glanced one last time at the photo. There were now 5 blurred figures behind the family, perfectly aligned with each of them, mirroring them, each one standing just an inch closer, their faces still indistinguishable, their eyes little more than dark smudges staring out from the paper. She turned away quickly, unable to breathe. But her son stayed. He whispered something she almost didn't hear. "They look like us." When the house stood empty again, it was quiet. For years no one lived there. The photograph remained, nailed to the wall where it had always been. But one evening, a storm swept through the valley, and a traveler sought shelter inside. He said the place felt frozen in time, untouched, though dust blanketed everything. But when he reached the hallway, he stopped. The photograph was still there, and though the image was faded, he could still make out the family in the field. Only this time, there were too many faces, dozens of them, packed tightly behind the first few rows, stretching all the way into the horizon of the harvest field. Every one of them staring forward, their expressions blank, their eyes hollow. He left before sunrise and never returned. Years later, a historian visited the farmhouse, drawn by the rumors. He wanted to document the story, to find the truth behind the strange photograph. He carefully removed the frame from the wall, wrapped it in cloth, and took it home. That night, he placed it on his desk to study in better light. He wrote in his journal that the photo was old but stable, that the figures seemed to be artifacts of time and damage. But the last entry in his notes was short. It read, "There's movement in the glass." They found his home empty the next morning, the front door unlocked. The chair he'd been sitting in was overturned, and the cloth that had covered the photograph was on the floor. The photograph itself was gone from his desk, but the frame remained, glass intact. Pressed against the inside of it were fingerprints, dozens of them, small and large, layered over one another, as though many hands had been pressed against it at once. And beneath the glass, faint but visible, was his reflection. But his eyes were open, and his mouth was not. No one knows where the photograph is now. Some say it was buried deep underground, sealed away by those who feared what it had become. Others whisper that it still hangs somewhere, waiting for another wall, another family, another set of faces to watch. But they all agree on one thing: photographs don't change on their own. Something inside them has to want to be seen. And sometimes, when you stare too long at what's captured, it stares back. It was the last night of October, when the wind carried the smell of dying leaves through the valley. The town of Merrow Creek had always been quiet that time of year, too quiet, some would say. The trees stood bare, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for the dull sky, and the old houses that lined the road looked more like silhouettes than homes. People kept their curtains closed once the sun went down, not out of fear but out of habit, an old tradition no one questioned anymore. But sometimes, traditions are born from something people want to forget. It was on that night that a young woman named Lila decided to test that silence. She'd grown up hearing the stories about the road that ran through the forest just outside town. Locals called it Hollow Bend, and every fall, they claimed to see a light drifting between the trees, a faint, pulsing glow that moved like someone carrying a lantern. They said it always appeared between October 30th and November 1st, right around midnight, and that anyone who followed it never came back the same. Most people laughed it off, called it superstition or small-town folklore. But Lila didn't believe in ghosts. She wanted proof that there was nothing to fear, so she waited until the last house light went out, grabbed her jacket, and walked toward the bend in the road. The air was cold, but the night was clear. The moon hung low, and the crunch of her boots on the gravel was the only sound for miles. At first, it was just quiet, that kind of stillness that makes you think the whole world is holding its breath. But then, from somewhere ahead, she saw it, a small flickering light, pale and soft, swaying between the dark trunks of the trees. She froze. For a long moment she just stared at it, her breath visible in the air. It didn't move like a flashlight, not steady or controlled. It wavered gently, like something being carried by hand. Against her better judgment, she stepped off the road and into the forest. The ground was damp, covered in leaves that muffled her footsteps. Every few seconds she'd lose sight of the light, only for it to reappear a little farther ahead. It almost felt like it was waiting for her. The deeper she went, the stranger it felt. The forest seemed to shift around her, the air thicker, the sound muted. She couldn't hear her own footsteps anymore. couldn't even hear the rustle of the wind through the branches. All she could see was the light. It hovered ahead, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure holding it, but it was too far to tell, just a shape in the dark. She called out, asking if someone was there, but her voice sounded small, swallowed by the trees. The light paused, then drifted slowly toward her. Something inside her told her to run, but she didn't. She stood still, frozen as the glow grew brighter. And then, without warning, the light went out. Total darkness swallowed her. Not even the moonlight broke through the branches now. She reached into her pocket for her phone, fumbling for the flashlight, but when she turned it on, it only illuminated a few feet around her. That's when she realized the ground beneath her had changed. The leaves were gone, replaced by damp earth, and there, in the dirt, were footprints, bare ones, leading toward where the light had vanished. She started backing away, her heart pounding so loud it filled the silence. But as she turned, she saw something move between the trees. A figure, not far away, watching her. It was tall and thin, its shape distorted by the shadows. She tried to speak, to call out again, but her voice caught in her throat. The figure stepped forward, and in the faint glow from her phone she saw its face, or what should have been one. It looked wrong, stretched and pale, as though the skin didn't quite belong to it. Its mouth was too wide, its eyes too dark. The phone flickered, the light dimming. The figure moved closer, slow and deliberate, its head tilting slightly as if studying her. Lila turned and ran, the forest closing in around her. Branches tore at her jacket, and the cold air burned her lungs. But she didn't stop. Behind her she could hear something moving. Quiet at first, then louder, faster. She didn't dare look back. The only thing she could see was a faint glow returning, that same pale light chasing her through the trees. She burst out of the forest and onto the road, falling hard onto the gravel. When she looked up, the forest behind her was completely dark again. The light was gone. She stayed there for minutes, maybe hours, just breathing, shaking, staring into the void between the trees. When she finally stood, she noticed something on her sleeve, a handprint, dark, damp, like it had been pressed there by something that shouldn't exist. Lila didn't tell anyone what happened, but after that night, people in Merrow Creek started talking again. They said they saw the light more often that year. Some said it came closer to town than ever before. Others claimed that sometimes there were two lights instead of one. The local sheriff went out to investigate once, just to calm the rumors. He came back pale and silent, said he didn't see a thing, but he never took that road again. Months passed and Lila tried to forget, but strange things began happening at her house. The lights flickered at the same time every night. Her reflection in the window would sometimes linger a moment too long after she turned away. And every morning when she walked past her front door, she'd find dirt on the doormat, always damp, always shaped like footprints. She started sleeping with the lights on, keeping her curtains drawn tight, pretending the world outside didn't exist after dark. Then one evening, while closing the blinds, she saw it again. That same faint pulsing glow. Not in the forest this time, but across the street, right in front of her house. Didn't move. It just hovered there, steady and patient. She froze, her fingers still gripping the curtain, and for the first time she noticed something she hadn't before. The glow wasn't coming from a lantern. It was coming from something that looked like an open mouth, wide and hollow, shining with the same pale light that had led her into the woods. No one saw Lila the next morning. Her car was still in the driveway, her keys on the counter, her phone left on the table with the flashlight still on. The sheriff found her front door open, mud on the floor, and the faint smell of wet leaves in the air, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Only a single trail of footprints leading out the door and stopping at the edge of the road, right where the forest began. Some say the light of Hollow Bend isn't a ghost at all. They say it's something older, something that calls out only to those who don't believe, It doesn't lure the fearful, it waits for the curious, and once you see it, once you follow it, it follows you back. So when the leaves start to fall and the nights grow long, and you find yourself driving down a lonely road with trees on both sides, don't look for the light between them, because if you see it, it means it's already seen you.